Nick, this is kind of your area, and I just wondered whether you could kind of talk us very, briefly through the pros and cons of the flexi office versus the conventional lease and why they're so popular.
Thank you. Okay. Well, as you'll know, we hold up the, if you like, the serviced or the flexi model against the conventional leased office, and we often show people both, explaining that it's horses for courses, and we've got to figure out which horse you are and which course is right for you. Now, if we go down the 4 column here, when somebody, I've mentioned that when somebody takes a serviced office, they're looking at something like a year's license agreement rather than a lease. What this means is the commitment period that you have is a lot less, and therefore your financial outlay, you're not committing to spend X amount of money over the next 3 years. But there's also other financial risks as well that you're kind of mitigating with it. Flexibility of term and size. So I mentioned 1 year rather than 3 years, but actually you could get monthly rolling. So at 30 days notice, you could leave that space, or actually where it's really good is for changing size within that space. Whether you decide you're 20 people big at the moment, but you actually only need half those staff to come in after furlough and post lockdown, you might be able to reduce that to 10 or 12 or whatever makes sense for you. And again, we can't anticipate what's going to happen next. That ability to change in size is quite useful for looking at the cash flow. Speed and simplicity of occupation. When I help a client find a lease space, I give them some guidance that this is going to take somewhere between 3 and 9 months. But let's ballpark give it 6 months. And it really depends a little bit on how complex their requirement is. But it does take that long. And the reason it takes that long is people are looking for, well, firstly, I have to find the places for them. Then we narrow it down and then they view them. And then they negotiate, and then they may or may not go for that. And there's the legals, and there's the fit out, and all this takes time. Serviced office is pretty much there for you. I know a lot of the stock, yes, things come in, but somebody gives us a location, and within a day or two, they can have 3 to 6 to 9 viewings, however many they want. The record for turnaround here has been 3 days. Sometimes it might be 30 days, and that's probably a bit of a normal 30 to 60 day flow. But it means that you can respond and you can take one of these spaces quickly. Low one-off and upfront costs. So your upfront cost in a serviced office is perhaps a deposit of 1 or 2 months, and some don't even take a deposit. In a leased office, you might have a 6-month deposit, a 3-month deposit, a 9-month deposit. But you're also going to have all the fees, the agency fees, the solicitor's fees, and the fit-out costs. So there's more as well. But all of those sound like great benefits, but they do have to be weighed up against other things. And people have to figure out where they stand on them. So the against here, control and privacy. Privacy has been quite a strong one over recent years because there's been a fashion for serviced office providers to put glass partitions in. And people want to have obligations to hide the data and the information on their screen. There are ways around that. But it is a concern, and particularly in shared spaces where you're having conversation. Now that's becoming more of a concern now, because in these shared spaces, if you've got to keep 2 meters from somebody, but have a conversation with them, how are you going to keep that relatively hush-hush, quiet and private? And it'll be interesting to see what Carl and what Rob have to say about that and some of the solutions. Workspace density, I think I've kind of mentioned previously. Is it an increased risk? We'll hear later about that. Brand control. Some people think they have less brand control if they're in a flexible office space. They do, but the market is getting so diverse now that I'd argue we just need to put you in the right building that kind of reflects your brand, and it's probably there. The one that you won't get away from is lifetime costs. And we show our clients that over a period of a number of years, if you know the predictability of your size and your growth plan, then the lifetime costs will be lower in a leased office than a serviced office. The reality is, who knows that now? We're in very unpredictable times, and the benefit of having that flexibility while keeping your outgoings sort of predictable and relatively low is probably a good idea strategically for most people. On that note, I'll hand you back.
Yes, no, I think that's interesting. I have to say, I think the biggest disadvantage of being in a fully glazed kind of serviced office is you've got to keep your desk tidy. But,